My name is Matt Arant. I'm the founder of Arant Academic Planning. I'm an independent educational consultant based in the Austin, Texas metropolitan area who primarily specializes in Division III and Ivy League athletic recruitment, as well as boarding school admission, with a specific focus on post-grad and reclassifying years for athletes. This is part of our series on key issues in the boarding school admission process. We've done a few of these already, but now we're going to be discussing the all so significant portion of the application known as writing, how it's utilized, what do you write about, maybe technically versus content-wise. And I'm joined by a couple of boarding school admission enrollment leaders, so I'll let them introduce themselves before we kind of go ahead and get started. So, Kim, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Kim Major. I'm the Director of Admission at George School. I've been here for about 10 years. I'm also an advisor, and I've been a dorm parent, and both of my children have attended George School. And we'll do the intro to George School in a little bit.
Hi, I'm Susan Montiagoing, Dean of Enrollment Management at Pomfret School in Pomfret, Connecticut. This is my fifth year leading the admissions and financial aid office at our school. Like Kim, I am an advisor, one of my favorite roles at my school, and also help out as uh, complementing in the dorms or being a school officer in charge in case of any emergencies at the school. My son graduated from Pomfret last year and is a freshman at Wake Forest.
Great. So I guess Susan, now you just finished. Why don't you just give us a little bit more of the kind of the spiel that you always tell your families, whether it's at a school fair or visiting folks all around the world. What is Pomfret School in a couple of minutes?
Yeah, so Pomfret is a school of 350 students. We are primarily a boarding school. About 85% of the student body live on campus and are coming from all over the world. So we have about 31 different countries represented in our school and kids coming from 30 states across the US. We are in this beautiful northeast corner of Connecticut, so really close, I would say about an hour or so from Boston, but great access to a couple of little metropolitan cities as well. So we're close to Worcester, we're close to Hartford, we're close to Providence, which is a hub for many colleges as well. So our students also will generally have access to some of the resources that are available there, whether we're taking advantage and going to check out a Holy Cross baseball game or having activities that happen at UConn. We really take advantage of our location. We have 500 acres of land, and so lots of places for kids to explore and use all of our 500 acres as a classroom as well. We recently finished a brand new 22,000 square foot science center, have a focus on experiential education and allowing and encouraging students to, travel around the world, really invest in reflection as part of their educational process as well. We have a great wellness program as well because we want students not just to be, the smartest kids that they can be, but also to develop these life skills that are going to help them in college and beyond.
Okay. So now, Kim, why don't you share with us a little bit more about George School, please?
Sure. So George School is a boarding and day school of approximately 525 students. We're located in Newtown, Pennsylvania. So we are just about 15 minutes from Princeton, New Jersey, less than 2 hours to New York City, 45 minutes from Philadelphia, and 3 hours to Washington, D.C. in a very safe and suburban setting. So easily accessible to major international airports. JFK, Newark, and Philadelphia are the primary airports that our students use. We are approximately 50% boarding and 50% day, which is a really nice mix because then you don't have a small group of students othered in, like when I was in a boarding school and it was 90% boarding, those day students were just kind of in that area. So we're really mixed in multiple ways. I think there are a few things that define George School. One is our Quaker heritage. We were founded in the Quaker tradition. Quakerism is a religion, not terribly popular in the world, and only about 3% of our community is Quaker. We simply focus on core values of simplicity, peace, integrity, community, equality, and service. Roll that all together just means that we're really kind to each other. We value truth. We value honesty. Another hallmark of the George School experience is truly the diversity and flexibility of the curriculum. We offer a tremendous array of advanced placement or AP courses alongside traditional and honors courses. And we also offer the International Baccalaureate or IB program, which is not required, but about 30% of our students will pursue the IB diploma, and about 90% of students will take at least one IB course. So all of those give students tremendous choice and flexibility in their curriculum. I think the coolest thing about George School is our global focus. We currently have 51 countries represented in our student body. So we bring the world to George School, but we also think it's important for students to go and experience the world. So because of a very generous gift that was received, our academic travel program is fully funded. So every year we send approximately 100 students to some place in the world as part of their academic program for a 3-week travel. And that comes at no additional course fee. So we allow that international travel to be accessible to all. And of course, we're going to find a great array of clubs and athletic opportunities and arts to round out your experience. So that's George School in a nutshell.
Okay, great. Thank you. So before we kind of, I guess, get into the weeds more about kind of the writing portion of the application, I guess it makes sense for me to kind of share. I've shared this in other webinars, as I've come from the college side. So college admissions, I was there for 5 years, and the college essay is basically a cottage industry at this point. You have self-appointed or otherwise experts in this topic from all over the world, and how sharing that with students and families, and there's almost as if there's like a unreasonable burden placed on the essay in a comparison to the college application as a whole. I worked at a college where we had to review the entire application in 5 minutes. You don't have to do a whole lot of math. No, there's not a whole lot of time to really dive deeper in those specific components. Contrast to what we are doing, most likely smaller applicant pools, which means more time is devoted to each specific portion of the application, including writing by both either the student and or parents and guardians. So that kind of whole preamble aside, can you kind of share with us what exactly is the writing portion of the boarding school essay? Is it a uniform prompt? Is it something that is drawn from the student's previous academic background? How exactly is that, I guess, included within the application for admission to your respective schools? Does that make sense?
Mhm.
I guess I'll start. I think part of what's included in the writing piece will depend on the school.
Mhm.
Many schools will use the SAO or a standard application online that has a set of prompts that are built in and are really built to be universal. So that, again, every school who uses that platform has a general sense of who these students are, what are some of the things that are interesting to them, and perhaps a challenge that they've faced. Some schools will also have a supplemental piece where they are asking for an additional prompt that is wedded to something that's important to their school community,
Mhm.
a piece that they want to assess. And so those are sort of some of the general pieces. There are additional platforms, and those questions might be different. So if you are looking at a boarding school that only accepts gateway applications, you might have a different set of prompts. Or schools that use Ravenna, you may have a different set of prompts. But in general, the spirit of the writing sample is an opportunity for us to get to know who that individual is and what is important to them and why. And it helps us imagine the student at our respective schools.
Susan, I think you said that well. And I think this is, if I can offer a tip, usually in the secondary school admission process, there are multiple prompts, shorter responses than a typical college essay.
Yeah.
So they're asking different things. And my advice for students applying is to look at each of those prompts as an opportunity to share a different facet of yourself. So if you, for instance, love dance or love baseball, if every one of your responses ties in some way to dance or to baseball, that's great. We know that you have that passion and that interest, but you've lost an opportunity to showcase another interest or another passion or another facet of your personality. And all schools really want students who are multifaceted and who want to experience different things. So my advice is to think about diversifying your responses. They can all have a similar theme, but really they shouldn't all be on the same subject overall.
Agreed.
And funny you mentioned kind of like that uh, potential pitfall of being too one-dimensional, but having a very specific passion, right? When I talk to families and students on the athletics front about applying to colleges, I tell them the last thing you want to do is make the admission office know that you're an athlete before they even start reading the application, right? Because there are platforms in place. They already know if you were recruited as an athlete, so you don't need to continue to kind of beat that horse
Yeah.
to death, more or less. So kind of how it, I guess maybe think about like the supplemental pieces. So I imagine at George School there might be something along the lines of I guess implementing Quaker values into your own life. I know a lot of the Quaker colleges in Metro Philly have something similar. Am I too far off base with that?
You are not.
Okay.
We do have one supplemental question. We ask for it to be, approximately 150 words. So we're not talking about a thesis. And we typically ask of all of the spices, simplicity, peace, integrity, community, equality, service, which speaks to you most and why? So of those things, what resonates with you? So it helps us just to understand who you are as a person in the process.
Okay, great. So thinking about, you both mentioned that very global communities, right? So it's not a, a misconception to say they're all the people that are applying to your respective schools, English is their first language. There's a multilingual applicants from all across the world. So how do you balance that really diverse applicant pool with not necessarily 100% English fluency and its impact on the writing itself? Because we know the ages of these students are a lot less than international student applying to college, for example. So how do you kind of balance those two competing issues?
So do you want me to take this one first, Susan?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. So, I think it really is going to depend on each school. First and foremost, how a school will look at an international or a non-native speaker's writing sample will depend on whether or not they have an English as a second language program.
Mhm.
George School does not. So if writing is well below what we would see as typical for, say, a ninth grade applicant, then that student will really struggle. Whereas if we see some grammatical errors, meaning, some flipped tenses or some dropped articles or, some of the common phrasing, then that's something that we can likely work with. We also will look to see, has this student been in English immersion for their learning for 5 years or 5 months? And if they've been in global learning or in, English-based learning for the bulk of their education, and the writing is still well below, that is sometimes a little more concerning than somebody who may be coming from a public school where there is no English immersion and the writing may be rougher. And we know that with some time and perhaps a little coaching within our writing center, that they will be successful. So we look at the context of the application and the school alongside the actual writing sample.
And I'll add, while again, the focus tonight is on the writing piece, there are other pieces in the application
Mhm.
that help us identify and build some context around the student's writing. And I would encourage you to, many schools again require a graded writing sample. That is really helpful. It gives us a sense about the kind of feedback that a student is receiving in their current school community. It's the reason why I think at every school that I'm aware of, there's an English teacher recommendation that's a part of the process as well, where we're soliciting feedback from the adult who's doing the instruction, to give us a sense of what are they covering in their classroom, what kind of feedback are they getting, and what kind of engagement has the student shown in those English classes. So all of that helps us build that puzzle piece to understand whether or not they're ready for our programs. Pomfret School also does not offer a ESL program, and so that helps us imagine, again, fit. Schools also may require some English assessment exam. It might be like a Duolingo or a TOEFL. So understanding the requirements around what a school expects to help the school get to know you better is going to be really important. But for tonight, again, the writing piece gives us a glimpse into who you are and what's important, and again, how strong of a writer you are at this point.
Yeah, because we think about English, for example, conversational English is very different than written English, right? So when I would review applications for Franklin and Marshall, the college I worked for, we would get tons of international applicants, and we would have interviews as well as writing. And it would almost, it depend on the student, it could be flipped. One could be very formalistic in the writing and not have as much of like the colloquialisms, excuse me, of the spoken language, or they've have the spoken language done perfectly, but they have issues with spelling and punctuation, all that. So it's kind of a balance to think about that English, especially, it's not the same written versus speaking and writing with all those kind of technical aspects too. So speaking of technical versus content, right? We think about writing for admissions, whether it's to the high school side or the college side, it's always kind of not necessarily balanced between or competing between the two of content versus kind of mechanics. So I was wondering for y'all, how do you look at that bigger picture of the role of voice or tone or content as a whole, contrasting with subject verb tense? Like we talked about those nuts and bolts versus kind of the heart of that person that's written through the tone of the piece itself. How do you kind of balance those two pieces of the writing process for those applicants?
Kim, do you want to start?
Sure, I can start. So, I think that they're both valuable, and I think it's important to note that particularly when students are applying for the ninth grade, we know that many schools, including a lot of public schools, don't do as much writing as they used to. So we're not expecting Pulitzer Prize level winning writing. We know that there may be some mistakes. It's okay. We want you to try to be, and especially if it's an off the cuff writing sample that's part of a test or an assessment that's given, we know that there are likely going to be errors. So we want you to go back and focus on proofreading and make sure that you are doing your best to be accurate. But we don't want students to think, oh my goodness, I used a comma instead of a semicolon. There's no way that I'm getting into George School. We're not going into that detail. We want to make sure that a student is largely squared away on their mechanics with the basics, and we can refine the rest. In terms of the content and the tone, really there's a wide range. We are not looking for anything specific in the actual content of the prompts that students respond to.
There's not a checklist. You don't say, "Oh, they've talked about this.
We
Good to
don't
go. Let's bring them on home." Yeah.
There's no rubric that we're
Yeah.
using in for the writing in terms of the detail. It's more sometimes things that we weren't expecting that might raise some flags. This happened a little bit more on the college side. When I was in college, I had some essays where I got the content and I called the guidance counselor and said, is this student okay?
Mhm.
Because they were writing more like therapy
Yeah.
than anything else, and I was concerned for them. And occasionally some of those things pop up that we will hear about a student's struggles in some way. And if their student writes, for instance, this has happened to me where a student wrote about struggling through an eating disorder. And I was so proud of that student for owning that and sharing that. We did use that as that was a disclosure, and we did follow up with the family to make sure that if we admitted the student, that they would be healthy in that school. So sometimes we look for things that we may need to follow up on to make sure that the student is well. And overall, we're looking for the kinds of things that prove that the student is a match with our values. So George School, for instance, is much more about collaboration than competition. We don't have students that go around saying, I have to be number one at all costs. I have to be the best. And if we hear in the tone, I have to be the best, I have to win, I have to win, I have to win, that student is going to struggle mightily socially at George School and may give us some pause. So we tend to look for, what are they saying, that does it match with our values? Are there areas of concern that we need to follow up with to make sure that if admitted, the student will be well?
One thing that we also pay attention to is making sure that the words are of the student. And so it says it everywhere. Again, the student is the one who would engage in our curriculum and enhance our schools. And we need to hear directly from the students. And so there's a difference between helpful proofreader, right? If a parent is a helpful proofreader, or a consultant like you, Matt, is a helpful proofreader. But we want to make sure that it's of the student's own work, and that their meaning and intent and stories aren't altered by adults who want to be helpful. Uh, Oftentimes, as admission officers, because there are, again, many layers to the process, whether it's the graded writing sample or an interview, we can tell whether or not the essay piece in the application has had maybe a little bit too much help, right? Maybe it feels a little too AI, or it feels a little too much like the conversation I had with mom and not the conversation that I had with the student. And so that is really important to us. We are using this piece to help us imagine what the student would be like at our respective schools. And so making sure that the work is of the student is very important.
If I can add on to that, we have seen cases where literally from the parent and guardian written sample, there is copy and paste from, or a question that is supposed to be in the voice of the student is referred in the third person. So it's clear that an adult wrote that. And that's not what we're looking for. And we would rather see imperfect and authentic than perfect but inauthentic. We want to hear your voice. And as Susan said in the interview, we know how a student speaks. We know their vocabulary. And some students speak with a vocabulary that's up here, and their writing matches that. But if in the interview they were not speaking at that level, right? Like they're ninth graders speaking as a 12th grader, or if they're not, and if the writing reflects that, then we're going to question the authenticity, whether an adult helped to write that, or AI helped to write that. And there can be a place for AI in education, not in these essays. They should be your own.
So that kind of leads me, I guess, to the next couple of questions. So, what exactly do you think the role of the parent or legal guardian should be in this process, specifically when it comes to the written portions of the application itself?
I think an idea generator, sometimes sitting down and actually getting to share who you are, it can feel overwhelming. And so students might need to be able to bounce ideas off of a parent, right? To just think about, is this a good example? I think parents, again, are always encouraged and are a primary support for their children. And that doesn't change whether or not they're in a boarding school or obviously at home. But again, part of at least this idea of going to boarding school is expecting a little bit more growth, a little bit more independence. And this application process could be a good litmus test to begin and figure out whether or not a student is ready for the challenges and expectations that they would have by living away from home in a boarding school community. And so I know for my own child, as he was getting ready to apply to colleges, I was sort of step back, like, hey, do you need anything? How can I be helpful? Maybe a reminder of like, okay, so remember, we've got this calendar with the important dates, or do you feel like you're making progress towards those pieces? That I think is a healthy and appropriate role for a parent to support the student. And again, being a proofreader, making sure that if there's an example, maybe that they didn't give themselves enough credit. I remember when I was looking at schools and of a similar boarding school age, I forgot or I minimized some of the things that I did because it just felt like, oh, well, yeah, I go to church. But I was really involved in my church and I was leading a class and I was part of the chorus and I was part of all of these things. And because it was just sort of something that I did and was important to me, but I didn't think of it as noteworthy
Mhm.
to celebrate in my writing or in my application. I forgot about it. And so having a trusted adult to be able to bounce ideas off of made a really big difference in being able to sort of share who I was and share what was important to me. But all of the work should be of the student. And so again, a helpful idea generator or proofreader, I think that's a good role for a parent.
What you described, Susan, when I both of my children applied to George School while I worked here, one while I was a director of admission, and let me tell you, that's hard. You have to use a lot of self-restraint. So I printed out the writing prompts and I gave it to them in Word and I said, go for it, and gave them a deadline. And then they turned back their drafts and I read them and I turned it back and I said something like, please go back. I think you've forgotten what a comma is in this, or in one case with one of my children, one of the prompts was 3 words that you would use to describe yourself, and what how he wrote one said, I know you don't intend for this to be the case, but you kind of sound arrogant. You might want to go back and check your tone on this. And so it's that advising and that guidance. But I always like to say in any of the writing prompts, we generally expect that there's some level, I do this, of adult intervention. And that's okay. Um, but that's why we also like to see more of a raw writing sample as well, so that we can compare the two.
So thinking about, I guess, well, more follow-up about the questionnaire piece, we kind of see on the websites, oh, it's the writing sample for the student and the prompts, but then there's also a parent guardian questionnaire. Is that another uniform kind of sheet, or are there little nuances based on the school itself? Like what would be kind of some specific pieces of that parent guardian questionnaire, if you don't mind?
So I think on like the common application, the SAO
Okay.
application, for example, the schools are asking if there's anything that's been unique to the student's experience that we should be aware of, right? That might be something like we needed to relocate mid-year because of
Mhm.
a change in a parent's employment, and this is how it impacted my child. Or an opportunity also for a parent to share what are their hopes and dreams? What are they looking for in a good school home partnership? So that's why the writing piece from the parent perspective is also really helpful. This is a certainly, again, the students are living the experience, but it is always a school home partnership. And we want to make sure that we have a good understanding of what they're looking for and that our school is also sort of a fit and aligned with their goals and objectives as well.
In that parent writing sample, first, it's important to note we are not admitting a parent or guardian. So we're not grading any of the writing there. It's used simply to help us to get to know your child from your perspective. And as Susan said, it's a great opportunity to share about challenges. It's also a great opportunity to share if they may have any learning differences or any needs that we might be able to support. We know that if families share, if there has been a learning difference or a hiccup in the learning process in some way, if we know about that, we can make sure that we have the supports that are in place and we can line those up so that they are ready to go when a student arrives, and they can have what I like to call a soft landing, and they don't have to search for resources or flail if they may be eligible for some supports like extended time on testing or testing in a quiet setting. We can provide those things, but you need to let us know. And it's a great opportunity. So we know that it can be scary to share those things, but the more that you share, the better we can support your child. And the more we will feel that we will have partnership as we work with your child over their time at the school.
Okay. So if you could maybe kind of share with us a little bit about, as much as you can, obviously, what happens in the room itself when you're going through these applications, right? So, me couching my experience in the college, I had two very different experiences because I was working both pre and during COVID. So, as you might imagine, the locales changed from year to year in terms of how we did this in person versus virtually. And I was just wondering for y'all, how does that process look in terms of the office? And I guess also, what does that mean for those more qualitative portions, like your writing, your interview comments, the questionnaire? How does that figure in within the admissions committee process?
That's a tough question. It's a big question. So I can't speak for every office, but I expect that most of us are like what George School does, that we have multiple readers on a file and to help to make sure that we're mitigating any bias that may exist. Sometimes you have a great interview and you fall in love with a candidate, and then you can read some of the other parts of the application with a little bit of a lighter tone, or it can go in the opposite way. So having multiple readers on an application helps to, like I say, to mitigate bias. And most schools, I know we do, we create a rubric for what we look for in each aspect of the application. So we're looking for whether or not there's mission alignment. We're looking to assess activities and potential impact and interest in activities at the school. We're looking at the quality of the writing. We're looking at the interview. We're looking at curriculum, the rigor and the strength of the curriculum, as well as grades, to sort of give a guideline. And then we choose at George School, every student who applies is discussed at some level in admission committee. So we really, just to ferret out and to make sure that everybody gets their due time in the spotlight. It takes a lot of time, but it helps us to really get to know students and helps us to then think about things that might happen once they're enrolled, like who might be a good advisor, or do their dorm heads need to know about anything special? So by having that committee, it allows us to really start putting the process into place to support students when they are here.
At Pomfret, we have a similar process. And I think that, again, allowing these different perspectives to look at each application is very important. We usually see about 1,000 applications, maybe a little bit more, for about 125 spaces. And so being able to have these different perspectives, talk about fit for program, what we can do to support a student if they enroll is going to be really important.
Okay. A couple, I guess, a couple more questions and we'll wrap things up. So, thinking about the boarding school admission process versus the college admission process in terms of the age of the applicants, right? So, college, by and large, it's mostly going to be graduating seniors, PG students. There's 18, 19 years old, depending on the country too. Whereas boarding school or independent schools as a whole, you might have folks applying as a ninth grader, 10th grader, 11th grader, 12th grader, maybe, or even post grads, which that's a wide variety of experiences, right? So how does that come into play when reviewing the application from a writing standpoint as for a potential reclassifying 11th grader versus an eighth or ninth grader? Like how does that look from the writing standpoint?
So I think Kim spoke about that a little bit earlier in
Mhm.
terms of we are looking at writing um, and assessing it based on the grade level that you are, or the grade level that you are entering. So we have a sense of, again, the range of writing skills that we might have within our typical program, and we're looking for, again, students whose writing can meet or exceed what we are able to support. But it is all relative. And so, again, what I'm looking for in a writing sample for a ninth grader is going to be very different than what I'm looking for in and expect out of a writing sample for an 11th grader. Again, they're what our teachers are going to expect, and some of the supports that are built to help students transition and to be better writers, those grow and change at different levels. And so it is all relative to the grade level.
some examples, in when we're looking at, say, an 11th grade applicant, we expect that we're probably not going to see a whole lot of run-on sentences. We're probably not going to see a lot of sentence fragments. We will probably see less train of thought and more intentional, not hamburger essay type structure, but beginning, middle, and end, and greater clarity. Because hopefully they've been in school in ninth and 10th grade, really working on beginning to refine their writing, no matter where they started in high school. By 11th grade, they should have an elevated and slightly more sophisticated writing style than somebody who may be playing as an 8th grader that may have had very little writing other than preparation for a state test.
Okay. This final question, to be honest, might not have a whole lot, lot to it. My apologies, but it's been in the news for years, right? It's AI. You hear it all the time on the college side and use of AI in admissions, whether it's generating content, research, or actually doing the stuff for you. This, like I said, this might not be much informative right now because it's still in the early stages, but have y'all had discussions? I think we talked about it a bit earlier about those external parties, the parent, guardian, AI. How have you had those conversations, I guess, in-house or I guess, and additionally, talking to students and families about AI in the admissions process, maybe specifically looking at the writing part of it?
Yeah, I guess I can start. I mean, we don't have a statement on our application webpage or how to apply that's saying that you shouldn't be using AI. But in interviews, we do talk about that when folks talk about the interview process or the application process, we indicate that your writing should be authentic. That's different than how schools may allow or not allow AI in different levels of use in the classroom. And
Mhm.
there's big debate there. There's big debate here between different teachers and what is used. So following those guidelines here. But as we've said, that we really should want the writing to be truly authentic. And George School does something a little bit different because we have not required use of the SSAT, the secondary school admission test, for quite some time. And the one thing we really loved about the SSAT was the timed writing sample that's given right there. So a student has no preparation, they're writing right
I
there.
was going to ask about the use
Yeah.
of timed writing versus, oh, I have weeks and months to just craft and craft and
And,
craft all this. It
and
just,
we
yeah.
love that because we know it's not going to be perfect. There are going to be some errors, but we get truly authentic, no adult intervention in that writing. And we say, because sometimes people will do, and because we don't use the SSAT, we do a writing sample in our interview. So it's a 10-minute writing prompt. It's kind of like a journal entry. If students are here, they'll sit at that table back there in my office and they'll write their sample, or in another interviewer's office. If they're doing an online interview, they'll type into chat. And when they are doing a Zoom interview with the typing, we will say, this should be your own. You should not use a word editor. You should not be using AI. This should be authentic. And it really does give us a sense of a student's writing. And sometimes from those writing samples, that's where we can see a vast difference between the
Mhm.
very overly polished writing
Yeah.
that may have been done by an adult versus the rough writing sample. And we would rather see the rough writing sample than overly polished.
My piece of advice is really to remember that you're actually hurting yourself if you take these shortcuts in
Mhm.
this process. Our schools are excited to welcome a diverse student body who are coming with different lived experiences and school experiences and backgrounds. And so we are schools that genuinely embrace, again, kids who are coming from truly all around the world with different school settings and backgrounds. And this process is again really meant to help us make sure that we can support a student's needs, support who they are and what their goals are and their academic path. And so if you take the shortcut and choose to use AI, part of the challenge is again, you're handicapping the admissions office and being able to give a good assessment, right? There have been times where I've done a read and said, I think the student is wonderful. There's so many things that are a great fit for our program. We think this element would help them find greater success in transitioning to our school. And so we encourage or sometimes require some summer work or another sort of, again, opportunity to hone some skills. And so by taking the shortcut, you're really hurting yourself in allowing the school to partner with your family to make sure that we're setting you up for the best success should you enroll in our schools.
And if I can add to that,
Yeah.
two things. One, some schools will do differential placement for an English class. And if you've used AI or other assistants to write a much more sophisticated essay or response, you could be misplaced
Yeah.
in a where the expectations are high, and maybe you don't want to leave that high placement, and you might be tempted to use those shortcuts again, which will have deeper consequences in terms of academic integrity. The other thing to note is that sometimes, and we'll go back to our non-native speakers of English, we know that translation can be challenging. We've read some essays where it's very clear that a student used an editor or a translator and copied and pasted because we can see the native characters or language inserted where spell check or something doesn't catch that. And we know that that is not authentic writing, and that can have a negative impact on the admission decision, because we want students that, even if they're not perfect, they have integrity with the academics. So it is best to keep it real, keep it authentic.
Like you said, that imperfect authenticity as opposed to the perfect inauthenticity, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So I think that's a great place to end on. So on behalf of Susan and Kim, thank you for joining us for this session. I hope it kind of helped you understand how writing is used within the boarding school admission process, as well as how you should approach the writing process itself.